Welcome to Diversity Conversations, where we engage in thought-provoking dialogue to identify leadership solutions to today's most challenging conflicts. Stream live each week, Saturday 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Hosted by Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategist and CEOs Eric Ellis and Tommy Lewis. Join us and add your voice to this engaging diversity conversation.
We may not hear you, Eric, coming in. No worries. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Diversity Conversations. And I would like to welcome Greater Cincinnati, the United States, and the world to another great Diversity Conversations. I am Tommy Lewis, your president and CEO of Make It Plain Consulting. We'll be joined shortly by Eric Ellis, the president and CEO of Integrity Development. It's great to see you. I see you, Ty, folks coming in. Thank you for joining from Atlanta. We are excited not only to have our usual suspects, our community, join us, but we're also excited that we are going to soon be introducing a new producer. A producer, we will ultimately have maybe two producers, but we have another producer that will expand our scope of global diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's right up my alley, if you will. As you all know, I have served in a number of different DE&I capacities throughout the United States and about 55 different countries, from the Middle East to Israel, to Latin America, down in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, all the way into Malaysia, what we call Asia Pac, etc. And I will share with you that when we travel the world, we see that people think and live differently. And so we want to invite you this morning to think differently. We're going to explore this topic of DE&I and how it's showing up today. And most particularly, there's some reactions to this work over the last several years. Some of you may be able to put your thumb on it and say, hey, this is why we've been a plumb mess in this country. And then some of us are saying, stay the course. It's not over. Stay the course. DE&I is not going away anytime soon. So I'll pause there and I'll welcome our brother, my brother, Eric Ellis. All right. Not hearing the sound once again. No worries at all. No worries. Right. And that's part of this dynamics, right? As we are, Eric is talking, but we are unable to hear him. And that's no problem at all, right? No problem at all. So we're going to get into this topic, and we would like to invite our community to jump in as well, as you all typically do. Again, we have Ty coming in from Atlanta, Georgia. We have our usual suspects out on the West Coast and East Coast in this great Midwest area as well. Some of you may know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not new. It's not new at all. It's nothing that has been new for decades, many decades. The reason being is because people have been different for millennia. We have explored different ways of food, different ways of enjoying entertainment, different ways of really just living and working. And so that difference that people, you and I, bring into the space really informs our view of the world. And if we live in a hole, very tight hole, and we don't expand outside of that hole, that's our limited experience. However, if we get outside of that hole, get outside of that box, we may experience views, perspectives, lived experiences that are different than our own. I'll share a little bit about my week in that same vein. I had the opportunity to travel to South Carolina to see a musical concert in Columbia, a band called New Edition. And some of you may be familiar with New Edition. Came out in the early 80s. And in fact, this tour that they're embarking on is their 40th plus years of experience in the music industry. 40 plus years, going all the way back to songs like Candy Girl, for those who are familiar. And these brothers, joined by some other acts, act called Tank, who's a single performer, Guy, although it's Guy like it's one guy, it's actually a band, three individuals in the band, and then Keith Sweat. And Keith Sweat is a single person, but he's also joined by a band and dancers and all that good stuff. So we were in Columbia, South Carolina, to really experience a musical concert from a different perspective. And in South Carolina, there are a number of rich folks, rich being rich as far as culture. And we were able to jump in and listen to a very, very nice concert from a different lens. There's nothing like music. In fact, I always am somewhat jealous and envious of my brother, Eric Ellis, who is indeed a musician, a singer, a producer, and basically he should have his own star on the Walk of Fame. Right. So I know that Eric will appreciate it as always to jump in. And that's how we're going to jump into this conversation today, to make sure it strikes that musical chord. We would like to invite our community to chime in. We got Jonathan coming in from Dallas, Texas, right? Hey, welcome, brother. Welcome coming in. And so I think we can hear Eric. Eric,
yes,
yes, indeed, we got you.
So here's what I love about that, because that is an appropriate set of circumstances for the conversation that we're having today. So what we're saying is that DEI is under attack. And basically, I'm writing an article on this, Tommy, that the attack on DEI will fail. So what we just experienced was an attack on my vocals.
Yes.
It was basically an attack of me hitting the mute button. So that's the attack. And see, if you try to mute us, all we have to do is hit the button and we back the vocal. And so that's what these attacks on DEI are, man. They're like hitting the mute button, man. I mean, what? It's unmute. I'm back. I'm back. I mean, sometimes we just accidentally hit the mute button ourselves, and then we just unmute it. Come on back. So there's the whole show today. We want to give you an experiential example of what it looks like to try to attack DEI. Try to take people's voices away, censor their voices, you know. And that's why conservative groups are even going after Governor DeSantis. They're like, hey, man, what are you doing? I mean, we're half racist, but we don't even agree with you trying to censor everything out the world. That's not the way to go, man. We just got to keep fighting. You know, don't take away my microphone. And so, but as I thought about it, Tommy, I think that it's so important for us to maybe even first start with helping people to understand what are some of the key sort of approaches, elements of what we do that have allowed us to stand the test of time. So diversity is basically every one of us on planet Earth is unique. Every person wants to be able to bring their authentic selves to work, to their families, to the world. We want to be able to bring our authentic selves. We want to be able to bring our talent, skill, ability, potential. And when we bring that to an organization, we want it to be meaningfully included. And then when what we bring, our talent, skills, and ability, our potential, when it is included, it makes a difference. We want to be equitably recognized and rewarded and promoted. And then at the end of the day, a sense of belonging is something that's a part of human nature. In other words, Maslow, Abraham Maslow talked about it being one of the fundamental human needs. So how are you going to sort of legislate all of that out of the world? You're not, because everybody wants to have a sense of belonging. So that's what DEIB stands for. And I'll start, Tommy, with one of the things that I have in this article I'm putting together, how do you succeed with DEI? Because you and I have done that over the last 2 or 3 decades. I say the first thing is listen, learn, and lead. In other words, when we're working with organizations, you and I don't just come in with the megaphone doing a lot of talking.
Right.
We come in and we're actually listening to organizations. We're listening to their leaders. They've called us up because they've heard some things about our work. But we don't come in doing a lot of talking. We really want to start by listening to the leaders, what it is they're trying to accomplish. Then we want to ultimately help them develop some systems to listen to the authentic voices of their people. We want to learn as much as we can because we believe that every organization is unique and different in its own right. So we want to learn as much as we can about their organization. And then we want to be able to provide some leadership from the experiences that we've had over the last decades that we've been working. So I believe that those are the kind of things that buffer you against being able to be canceled when you come in listening, learning, and then leading. And I'll say one more thing, Tommy, because no two organizations are the same. I think that a lot of times people in the DEI arena, sometimes we feel as though the world is out to get us. These kind of attacks make you feel like, hey, nobody likes DEI. And I would say that organizations are struggling to create people-centered workplaces in general. And so what that means to you and I is that oftentimes when we're brought in through the portal or the entryway of DEIB, we often have to become strategists and consultants around people-related things in general. And so we're helping them to develop their managers and develop the skills that managers need to effectively lead. So,
Eric, I think this is a great point because listening is different than hearing. And so when we're in the work environment, the workplace, and we are hearing, we as consultants or employees and leaders within the organization, oftentimes there is always some vibration, some noise, something is always vocalized.
right.
That doesn't mean that we're listening to it, right? We can become ear numb to certain vibrations.
Right.
And so we want to come in to first listen, and then learning is different than actually just doing.
Right.
Because sometimes we can do things in our professional lives and in our personal lives that we haven't learned the lessons from what was done. And so in the business sector, we call it, continuous improvement. We're providing a service, we're providing a product, but are we learning from our mistakes? Are we
Right.
learning from our best practices?
Right.
And then if we have truly learned from our past experiences, are we leading into the future? So that's why I really resonate with the listen, learn, and lead, which could be different than just hearing and just going through the motions and just being upfront, quote unquote, believing that we're a leader. Very different things as we enter into this DEI and B efforts.
Right. Let me move to the second one, Tommy, and get your reaction to this one. The second point that I make around how we've been able to survive over the last 2 to 3 decades doing this work, and that's why we know DEI attacks are going to fail, is that number 2, you have to bring to this work what I'm calling DEI agility. You have to embrace flexibility in your approach to this work, constantly making adjustments based upon the evolving needs and interests of the organizations and their diverse constituents. You and I are not standing around as a solid target, as an immovable target to be shot. We are agile, which means you and I remain flexible to sort of understand and move in the ways that are necessary to constantly be evolving the work that we do. You and I know that the people that aren't agile in this space don't survive. It's simple as that. The marketplace sort of washes out those who really cannot continue to adjust, to adapt, to grow, to learn, so that they can be prepared to meet the evolving needs of the organizations we serve.
And how does that typically show up as a consultant or even as an DEIB champion or officer in the organization? How does it show up? Eric, it shows up where a person, consultant or employee, is not flexible. It shows up as burnout.
Right.
It really does. It's burnout.
Right.
It's when that person is laser focused and concretely fixed.
Right.
And immobile. And so they're unable to ebb and flow with the needs, demands, and even the direction of the organization. And so that looks like that one person or even a group of people, can be a committee or a council. It looks like that they're pushing that DEIB boulder up the hill.
That's it, Tommy.
Yep, up the hill. But when you are agile, right, you know where to pull off to the side of the road and take a rest, right? To look back and say, okay, this organization is not moving as fast as the leadership may want it, right? But let's meet the employees who are going to be doing the heavy lifting.
Right.
Let's meet them where they are.
That's right.
And then be agile and flexible. And even, Eric, at times we have to kind of fall back.
Right.
We have to take a few steps back and say, okay, let's revisit that learning from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or even yesterday. Let's revisit it so that we can be agile to move this work forward.
Right. And I've seen what happens, Tommy, is a lot of times if you're not careful, you come to this work, you can come with a degree of arrogance that believes that you've got something that's so right that you don't even want to hear from the client. You're just going to foist upon them whatever agenda you have. And that's just not sustainable. And I think that in the early days of this work, Tommy, I know that I thought that my job was to be a diversity ghostbuster, going to organizations, gunning down the racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobe. That's what I thought I was there to do. I literally had a formula that I was going to lose a third because I was going to call them a name. A third was going to be on the fence, like, I'm not sure if this brother is crazy or sane. But I felt like the third that I won over, they were going to change the world. And because of my faith, I tell people all the time that I feel like God called me into the principal's office and said, Eric, what are you doing? Why are you losing so many people? And I shifted in the 90s, Tommy. I shifted my style from more blaming and shaming to one of becoming more transparent around my own biases and trying to create learning environments that were psychologically safe. I didn't realize, Tommy, that change would create an environment where there was more transparency, where people were more willing to say, here's who I am. I learned from being agile that as you stop chasing people, they stop running. And then they start sort of feeling safe enough to admit who they are. We're never going to make progress in this space without agility and without an ability to make adjustments in how we approach this work.
I think that shows up as well in any other industry and role.
Right.
And you hit it right on the head of not shaming or blaming. So it's not a matter if you are in DE&I, if that's your main role or job. If it is, then we're talking directly to you. If it isn't, then we're talking directly to you.
That's
either way, it never benefits in the long run to shame, blame, and victimize people.
Right.
There's the African proverb, Eric, that goes, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. A person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. So we're not trying to convince people against their will. We're inviting them into this journey of self-awareness, self-knowledge, collective awareness, and a collective or mutual desired outcome. Do we want to win? Right? The person that raises their hands that, no, I don't want us to win. I just want to win. And then a decision is made. Right? We're trying to move forward as a team.
Right.
You're trying to be, kind of the solo champion. No, you're not a good fit for the organization. And so we have to always remain agile.
That's right.
And flexible. and have that dexterity
Right.
to be able to weather these storms that tend to come our way in the DEI and B space.
Diversity, dexterity. I like that, Tommy, because now for those that are on the attack, so if you're on the attack side of DEIB, guess what? You will eliminate people that don't want to change and people that just want to blame, shame, and beat folks up. But that the marketplace was already dealing with that.
Sure.
The only people that are surviving today are people that are doing good work and have been able to be agile and learn and grow, or people that make organizations more comfortable. So the people that are surviving are the people that look like them and are making them comfortable sometimes, and people that are doing good work. Let's go to 3. So in 3, I say that we've got to, one of the things that you'll need to do in order to be successful in this work is that you've got to establish backlash reduction strategies from the very outset of your client work. In other words, when you come in to work with organizations, or if you're inside of organizations working in this space, or in communities working in this space, you have to know intellectually from the outset that there's going to be potential camps that are looking to create backlash. And what I say is that what I've learned over time, Tommy, is that inclusion has to be inclusive. And so if white males don't feel like they're included, then you get backlash from them. If people of color feel like you're just doing something that's performative, then you get backlash from them. So you have to be consciously developing strategies from the outset that say, how do we identify and understand who are the groups that could potentially create backlash, and why would they do that? Because understand that would help you to then make sure that you're meeting those needs and not just frustrating people by continuing to do the things that make them feel like this is performative or it's not including me.
Backlash is inevitable. It's going to happen, Eric.
Right.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen early on or during the middle of the process, or Eric, is going to happen at the end. For example, if you're engaging with a consultant or you're engaging in the efforts in your organization around DEI and B, and you have a council or committee, and that committee has been in place for 2 years, and it's going to start to kind of sunset and then ramp up in a new form. As the council is beginning to sunset, there's going to be a spike in pushback.
Right.
And a number of "I told you so's," right? That didn't work as well as we thought it would in the last 2 years. I haven't been paying attention to what's happening, but I do know nothing's happening.
Right.
That's pushback, right? Again, that's an oxymoron. I haven't been paying attention to what's been happening, but nothing's happening. That's that kind of passive aggressive pushback.
Right.
And then you will have the pushback where the results of the work does not meet the need of particular groups. Right. So when you are doing inclusive work, there are still going to be individuals or small groups of people that will say, I'm excluded because you're working through inclusion. Let me say that again. As you're working through inclusion, there are going to be people that say, they're just going to say from their view, I'm excluded. Right? Because you've been focusing on people of color. You've been focusing on women. You've been focusing on LGBTQIA plus community. You've been focusing on veterans. You've been focusing on the able or disabled population. And where am I? Right. And so that's a valid question. Where am I? The short answer is you've always been a part of this, right? We focused on you 30, 40 years ago, and now we're focusing on this particular marginalized or underrepresented population in our workforce. We will include everyone, but simply don't raise your hand to say, because I didn't hear my demographic, my identity in this statement, then I'm being excluded. See, that's what happens as well. And that's part of the pushback, Eric. That's part of the pushback. If I don't see or hear myself in this narrative, then I am being excluded, which is not always the case.
Right. And I'll tell you, Tommy, for me, I don't even fight the battle at all. And that doesn't mean that as I've told you, I have adversaries and opponents who are they're tone deaf. They're not even listening to what it is you're doing. They just sort of fight back, rail back against this thing called diversity. But here's what I say, Tommy. So this is where I've evolved. I ask people all the time, what's the number one diversity issue in the workplace? And so they go to answer, and it's sexism, racism. I say, no. And I have fun with it for a while. Then I say, no, it's a trick question. But the number one diversity issue is the one that affects you. That's what I know, Tommy, that for all people, the number one diversity issue for them is the one that affects them. And so people selfishly, they don't have much patience for your thing, but they want you to have patience for theirs. And so I don't fight that. I came up with a slide, Tommy, that I say DEI sort of understands that the workplace challenges everyone, and that literally we have to develop customized solutions for how we make this workplace work for everybody. See, here's the thing. What I find, Tommy, is that too often people in our profession, we take ground that's too narrow. Expand your borders. In other words, take more ground, not less ground, take more ground. Take the people that are stressed out, the people that have anxiety, the people in neurodiversity, everybody, to open up the aperture to be able to fight for everyone. Because what I have found is that organizations are not people-centered. You know, I came up with this DEI Oz principle that says there are challenges that I've discovered even at the C-suite level, where 72% of them are afraid of being fired, 70% are looking for something else to do because they can't continue to sustain this. 80% of them are getting feedback and counseling through robots because they're afraid of people knowing that they're going through stuff. So what I say is, just like we know, Tommy, that the best educators are those that educate to the individual learner. The best consultants have to understand we have to customize our work to meet the needs of each group and individual that exists within the organization. Now, when I start fighting at that level in that way, Tommy, I tell you, it's hard for any attack to dismantle what we do because we're fighting for everybody. We're saying to the C-suite, let's teach you the empathic leadership skills. Let's help you apply those at the leadership level so that you develop healthier practices. When you start developing healthier practices there, you will also be more committed to making sure that those practices are replicated throughout the organization. So we go to every place helping to understand the needs of that group and then helping to solve those problems. Why? So that we can ultimately help them deliver their fullest talent, skill, ability, potential. If this was a person, we're trying to get 100% of that person's talent, skill, and ability, not at the very lowest level. You know, if this were a person, every person gets to choose what they give the organization from 0 to 100%. So when you respect them more, when you create healthier, you start getting more from them. That's what I believe, Tommy, that we do that makes it ultimately hard to fight against what we're doing.
I agree. That is the customized engagement, Eric. The customized engagement. And so if we're talking about demographics or populations that we were focusing on 30 or 40 years ago, and now we're in present day, the customized engagement is saying we're now listening right now, not just hearing, we're listening.
Woo!
We are learning
That's
from
right.
the current generation, the current population,
That's right,
the
baby.
current events and moments.
Right.
And we're going to lead into the future based on that historical biography, the past, the present, and moving into the future.
Love
it is
that.
Customized engagement.
Right. And so for those of you, I hope that somebody out there who's attacking DEI is listening. I hope they are, because see, here's a fact that's on our side. When you fight for people, they join your team. And so what we have found, Tommy, is that you and I sometimes are fighting for white males who are at the lower levels in organizations. and are sometimes victimized by classism. When you get in those trenches and start fighting for people to have rights, fighting so that they're not just judged because of a lack of a degree, but they're judged based upon their talent, skill, ability to learn, their work ethic. When you fight for people, Tommy, that's what you and I have on our side. And there really is no opponent who can take down people that are fighting for everyone.
You're spot on.
Let's go to the next one. And the next one then says, ultimately, the way that you sustain yourself in this space over time and you ensure yourself or insulate yourself against the DEI attacks is to add value. You have to add value. Have a clear value proposition that organizations and individuals believe can serve their needs and interests. You have to understand what your value proposition is and how it's going to be helpful in helping individuals and organizations serve their needs.
And Eric, we cannot tell people what their value is.
No.
We have to hear and listen to that value, because organizations so often will post on their website, on their walls, in their buildings, etc., the company's values.
Right.
And then there are employees that don't see themselves in that value, one, or two, they truly don't see their organization living out those values.
That's right.
And so there's a conflict there. And that produces that sense of not belonging, that sense of exclusion, that sense of, what is this all about? Right? Is that just some words on the wall or some letters on a web page? And those are our core values, as we call them. And so we're basically telling people what they are. Sure, organizations need to have a consensus of what the values are for the business, right? But it's very important for customized engagement and to make sure that inclusion actually is lived within the organization, that we're hearing from the people and they're telling us what their values are. At the same time, Eric, as we're listening to people tell us what their values are, we have to expect that their values will change over time.
Mm-hmm.
They will change. So one person's value as a entry-level employee may be different than that 20 or 25-year veteran.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It may be different because life values change.
Right.
That new hire may say, I want to come in and change the world, I want to change the world in like 6 months. And I want to be promoted to the vice president or president in about a year. And I want to make this type of money. And I want to do this. And then they realize that, this ship is like the Titanic, not sinking, but it takes time to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is your strategy for including others in your desired outcome?
Right.
What is your strategy? And that's important for not only the employee, but as consultants, is we're trying to oftentimes shift the organizational cultures that may have been in place for decades.
Mm-hmm.
It is unrealistic to have an organizational cultural shift in 3 months or 6 months. Unrealistic.
Right.
But when we are inclusive, we recognize the diversity issues in the workplace and surface those issues. And hopefully leadership does not take offense to the surfaced issues, but really say, that was below the waterline. Now it's surfaced. It must be important. Let's address it.
Right.
Let's address it.
Right. And I want to go here again, that the beautiful thing about what we do is that you have to be able to ultimately and fundamentally, you have to be able to add value to the clients that we serve, to the organizations that you serve, to the leaders that you serve. And Tommy, one way that you and I assess this is through evaluations. And so we are literally attackers of DEI. We are literally asking for feedback from participants on a regular basis. So we're constantly keeping our hand on the pulse of the organization to give people the free opportunity to weigh in on the effectiveness of our work. Now, I would ask any politician, are they willing to do the same? And if they're not getting 90 to 95% of people that are saying they're excellent, then don't run again. Let's put that up on you, the standard that we have to hold to. Tommy, if we only had 50% of the people saying we were good, how long would you and I last?
Oh, yeah.
You're not going to be there. And so they're giving us, well, you and I also get a chance to just see the ahas in people's eyes. We get to hear from people that say, I was dreading coming here because of the attacks. I was dreading. I never knew that this would be this valuable. We get to see them benefit from the insights that they gain from each other. And Tommy, you and I are in there taking notes as well, aren't we? We are constantly learning from our clients. People ask me, Eric, how can you be this passionate about something that you've been doing for over 30 years? I say it's easy. I'm not just a teacher. I'm not just a facilitator. I'm not just an educator. I'm a learner. And so I'm an enthusiastic learner. In other words, I bring the humility of not just being a teacher, but being a student. And I love to give people kudos when they say things. I said, wow, that was powerful. Let me write that down. A woman just said something this week. She says, we don't realize that everybody is carrying around a box of rocks, a pocket full of rocks. We've all got our baggage that we're carrying. And so we've got to find ways to give grace to one another. I said, thank you. I'll take that. And so that's the thing, Tommy, that I love about how we look at this work. You and I are lifelong learners as well. Any thoughts that you have about that and evaluations?
Absolutely. The evaluations, the climate assessments, the organizational or even equity surveys, these are pulses. These are pulse checks, if you will. And I would recommend that if they're not done annually, right, or maybe every 2 or 3 years, that they can be done in different iterations every 6 months.
Right.
Again, what that looks like, it's not one survey that is 80 questions long.
Right.
They are pulse checks.
Right.
Right. So you can deploy them in small increments. They can be small 10 questions that people may answer. And then at the end of the year, you may have deployed 2, 3, or 4 small pulse checks. And now you have a comprehensive review. Right. And you're developing a culture within your organization that people are becoming more and more accustomed to share their input. And Eric, not only is the organization receiving this feedback on a smaller incremental process, but they're doing something with the information. Right. Doing something. So now employees who are getting the employee survey or the climate assessment or whatever the tool is, they're not throwing up the flag of kind of passive aggressiveness saying nothing's going to happen with this. Right. We are now diminishing that pushback to say last month, right, or first quarter, we heard your thoughts. Here are the things that we are doing based on what you said. Mm-hmm. Right. We've collected what you shared. Right. We understand your desired outcome from what we collected. That's right. We're doing something against it. And then when we have another assessment, they don't know it's going to be in the next 3 months or 6 months or a year. When you do another assessment, we will welcome your input. Right. Now the workforce is saying, please, assessment, come soon. Right. Because I got something to say. Surfacing things. Tommy, so I do some polls during my workshops. And so one of the polls I ask is, are there times that you are uncomfortable sort of talking to people in the workplace around their diverse traits? I'm often very uncomfortable with that. I asked people, I said, have you ever hesitated to provide critical feedback to a subordinate, an employee, because you are afraid of how they might react or respond? I had 95% of them said yes. So Tommy, here's what happens then. 95% people saying that I'm not sharing some critical feedback with employees because I'm afraid of how they might react and how they might view me, that they might see me as prejudiced or something.
Tommy, you and I are then solving those problems. We're asking the question. So those that are opposing this work, you don't understand that people are afraid and they're not giving critical information to folks who need that information. And so when we ask that question, they say, yeah, me, I'm one of those. I'm not saying things to them. I'm not giving them all the insight they need to get better because I'm afraid. You and I are taking away that fear and helping them to develop the skill set to be able to raise those issues and provide that meaningful feedback in a way that can help that person succeed. When you're doing things like that, there's no attack on earth that can eliminate the value of creating comfort so that people can pass on the necessary input that's helpful for all people to be able to succeed.
Once again, Eric, you're spot on. You're spot on. I know we're going to go to a few more. You're spot on because the operative word is fear.
Right.
Much of the pushback that DE&I receives is out of fear.
Right.
Fear and uncertainty.
Right.
Right. Fear of how things used to be, whatever they were. Fear of loss of control of what people think they control. Right. Because none of us really control the future. And so we sometimes, those who push back, say, I'm trying to control the future, and I am fearful that this DE&I stuff is going to disrupt my future. The reality is that these conversations add value to the future.
That's right.
Because we're listening to one another. We are learning from one another, and we're leading together toward the future and not falling back into the past.
Right, right. Let's look at the next one. You've got to walk the talk and honor everyone. And so I say here that you've got to deliver empathy, respect, humility to everyone with whom you interact. In other words, one of the keys to our survival, Tommy Lewis and Eric Ellis, is that we want to walk the talk. Now, on the way to walking the talk, sometimes we miss the mark. When we miss the mark, we're willing to apologize. Tommy, you know, I was just talking about a couple of weeks ago how I had a person in a focus group's about something else, but they wanted to light into me. So DEI opponents, attackers, I want you to know that when somebody has an issue with me, when somebody attacks me rightly or wrongly, I'm going to help facilitate them getting their voice heard by the proper authorities. And I'll say to them, you have the right to your perspective. You have the right to your belief. If you think that anything that I'm doing is not right, take it to HR. There are places that you have to go if you feel a certain way. And it sort of throws a bucket of cold water on people who are simply trying to attack you and looking for a fight. So we must, Tommy, walk with respect. We must walk with humility. I find that a lot of times, Tommy, when people start becoming successful, they start believing that they don't have to take criticism. They start feeling like they're almost untouchable. I say everybody hates a bad boss, but they're aspiring to be one. You and I have had to make sure that we walk with humility and that we try to live out the values and the principles that we're trying to teach organizations. And when we fall short, we're absolutely willing to make genuine, authentic apologies and learn from those situations and continue to grow.
Eric, in this work, we are selfless. At the end of the day, Eric, we're selfless. And so what does that mean and how does that show up as well? Just this past week, Eric, we were working with a client for the last 2 years and the contract has ended. As we were working with the client, and there's a number of different employees, we have been deploying DE&I training every 3 to 4 months for 2 years. As we are entering into our final session with the client, there are literally hundreds of employees. I offer up to them that there's going to be a change in leadership, And to continue this work, to continue to bring value to this work and actually get things done, we can't always simply depend on leadership. That we, the employees, the staff, we have to take some accountability,
Right.
Eric,
Right.
to do the work.
Right.
Following the session, Eric, I got a call from leadership. Tommy, we being leadership, we heard that you said in the last session that because of the change in leadership, this work will not continue. I stopped her and said, no, that's not what I said. The conversation continued. And Tommy, it was told to me that you said that the work is ending because now there's a white female taking over. And I said, oh no.
Right.
That was my initial response, Eric. And this is what I'm
Right.
talking about, the value
Right.
and being, selfless. So although I knew that was absolutely a lie, I would never say that the work of DE&I is going to end because of one person or because of one's identity.
Right.
I would never say that.
Right.
In 30 years of doing this work,
Right.
I've never said it and I will never say it. But what I did say was to this person, this leader, I'm sorry for what you've heard. Yeah. Allow me to clarify, because I was very comfortable apologizing because it is not about me.
Right.
It is selfless, Eric.
Right.
That someone in the audience after 2 years decided to push back in a passive aggressive way and go right to the leadership and say, well, I told you whatever. I don't really worry too much about that. I worry about the end game. I worry about the whole. I worry about the inclusivity of all.
Right.
Right. And so if that attack is on me personally, I'll take it.
Right.
Right. If that attack is even on the process of and the journey toward DE&I, if the attack is on the process, the assessment, the survey, the training itself, I'll take that. Right. Because I'm leaning on, in closing, one of my mentors always said, hear me now, understand me later. He would always say that. Right. And that's one of the values that I bring 30 years plus, you and I, in multiple countries, multiple organizations. We have learned from hundreds of thousands of people. Millions. That it's not just me saying this. I'm saying, hear me now, but understand me later. Because the voice is not my own, it's ours. That's why the attacks on DE&I will fail, because it's the voice of a few against the voice of many. Saying we want to be included, we want to be equitable, we want this type of different and new and better thought.
Right. And I want to buy some stock in the currency of selflessness. So let's look at that. What you said, we are selfless. That's what I want to be. And that's what I strive to be. And that's not always what I'm implementing, because the self and the ego sometimes, Tommy, it can creep in. And you and I have to constantly work at beating it back, because the brain is a funny thing. It wants to look out for you. It wants to tell you you're fine, you're wonderful. Look at all the good work that you're doing. How can anybody challenge you or say something critical about your character or your approach? You and I, no matter what happens on the inside, no matter how sometimes our ego wants to knee-jerk reaction back to it, no matter sometimes when we want to just get people told because we make assertion that's, oh, I'm sorry. When I'm talking about a theory, then I have to go to a reality. I just had a reality happen this week, Tommy. I've been working on my tires. So I got new shocks put on my car. You were saying you're going to do shocks on yours. I did shocks on mine. So I went into a tire discounter, and the guy had quoted me a price, and it was a pretty good price. And then he said, if you get them here tomorrow, I'll be able to do it tomorrow. Okay, I got there the next day, the price had doubled. And so he asked me to come around the, now, before I got there, I called another tire discounter, and they said the price that he had said the first day, so about $500. And so now the next day it's $900. And so he was telling me come around the counter. I said, no, I don't need to come around the counter. I said, I don't know all those figures, da da da. Tommy, I was letting this guy have it, man. He wasn't an especially great communicator. I didn't think he was real warm. And so everything worked into my narrative that I was right and this guy was wrong. Now, I'm taking issue after all the work's been done. Now he told me the new price, $900 before they did the work. Then they did the work. Now I'm complaining afterwards. And Tommy, I thought I was right. I said, because the estimate said that it would be at least 7 hours of work. They got my car done in half that time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, well, I shouldn't have to pay for those 4 hours that you didn't have to work. Well, it's people's history. And I said, no, Tommy, I walked away and I felt like I was right. I was talking about I was going to send a letter to the leadership of all that kind of crap. And then he said one thing to me, Tommy, that I followed up on. He said, you probably didn't give him the SKU number. Your what's that number? The
VIN number.
The VIN number. He said, you probably didn't give him the VIN number. And I'm still, whatever, man. I walked away. But the next day after the workshop, I called another tire discounter. I gave him the VIN number for the car. It was the price that and he told me he gave me a slight benefit. He did. He gave me $100 deal. Then I asked him, well, what about if you get the car done in half the time? They said, well, we do a flat fee. In other words, we don't raise if the work takes more, we don't raise it. If it's lower, we don't lower it. We have a flat fee. Tommy, I said, oh my goodness, I was dead wrong. And you know what I had to do, Tommy? I had to go back to that shop and apologize to the guy. I said, can you go get the manager? I said, he came forward. I said, man, and he looked at me like, oh, here's this guy again. Yeah. I said, man, I owe you an apology. I said, I came in here yesterday and I was wrong. I said, I suggested that your integrity was not high. That was wrong. I said, I suggested that the numbers weren't right or fair. I said, I checked again with another tire discounter. And like you said, I gave him the VIN number and I came up with a number that was what you said you had shaved a bit off of that. And I saw that. I said, man, I'm asking for your forgiveness. I was wrong. And he looked at me and his mouth just dropped open. He said, oh, man, you didn't have to do all that. I said, yes, I did.
Yes, I did.
I said, because I was really kind of haughty in thinking that I was right. And I said, I was so wrong. I said, so really forgive me. And I felt better after doing that, Tommy. But we have to admit, sometimes when we get trapped and we're operating out of a bias and what we think, I looked at him, I had some data, Tommy, and everything about this situation made me think I was being had. And I'm not going to be that guy. And then all of a sudden, when you find that you are so wrong, you cannot just walk away from that, Tommy. It wasn't like I was running back. You know, I certainly wasn't selfless the day before. I had to get selfless once I understood the gravity of the mistake and my responsibility to go back. But I think I've built a friend now, somebody that I can trust for the future and somebody that will be happy to see me come as a customer.
Your story resonates with me. I would like to invite our community to, documentaries are what we do, Eric, and you just shared a lived documentary. It's a lived experience of humility, of learning, of life lessons, and actually of action toward humanity once your own humanity is questioned, right? Your humanity of being right or wrong, you are wrong.
Right.
How human are you?
That's right.
Are you the human that would go to another human to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I'm imperfect, I'm flawed, assuming that the other person is the same, imperfect, flawed, etc. If that is part of your DNA, which it is, It is part of your integrity. It reminded me of a quick documentary. I believe it's on Amazon Prime Video and maybe some other outlets. It has a very colorful title. I'm not going to share the entire title. You all can look it up, but I highly recommend that people seriously take a watch of this documentary. The title is almost nothing like the content.
Okay.
The subtle art of not giving a blank. The subtle art of not giving a blank.
Right.
Look this thing up, Eric Ellis and community. It will share with you an example of what really matters in our human lives.
That's right. That's right.
Not the things, not the accomplishments, not all. What really, truly matters. And this is from a gentleman who is a white gentleman who has gone through a lot of experiences and simply decided, I'm going to write a book. And he wrote the book. It became a bestseller. And then people picked it up and said, we're going to make a movie out of it. Right. And now it's in video form. So I wanted to share that as a compliment to what you shared around selflessness, around making the humane apology. And then I will say to you, Eric, that because we are faith-based, and I.
That's right, Tom.
Right, that you will receive tenfold of the blessing that you just did.
Right.
God has told you to do my will, although you have your own will, and I will reward you tenfold. So with you apologizing, saying, oh, Lord, I was wrong. He says, I knew you were wrong. You manned up to it.
Right.
I will bless you tenfold. That's the way this thing works.
That's the way this thing works, Tommy. I knew what I had to do.
Yep.
I got to go close the loop on this. I showed out a little bit yesterday. And even all that I didn't show out externally, I was showing out in my head.
Come on.
Because I thought I was that right. And man, when I got the clarity on that, and you see, I couldn't help but to follow up on it. Now, I wasn't following up with holy intentions. You know, I wasn't checking I was thinking I was going to confirm my biased belief. When I found that I confirmed what he said, then I had to go back. And I'll tell you what, man, I just felt like God gave me a big kiss at the end of that. That, Eric, that's what I'm talking about. I don't care who else sees it. And you need to make sure some of his coworkers are around.
To witness.
Same ones where you were talking garbage.
Yep.
That's right. They got to be there to see how this works. Eat those words. Apologize. Humble yourself. Don't let this man let you off the hook too easily. You dive in, lean in to that apology. Last thing, Tom, I'm going to give it to you. Build trust and confidence by delivering on assignments and requests. Organizations don't give anyone a blank slate to implement all the DEIB best practices. Begin by delivering on a project or engagement you've been invited to support and build confidence, trust, and increasing consultative freedom over time. In other words, we got to go. Tommy, the thing that sustains you and I the most over time, historically, and into the future will be delivering against people's needs and what they come to you for. They don't come to us to ask all of our input from the outset. They want us to do a particular project. Tommy, they want you to speak somewhere, facilitate somewhere, or do a study. That's the only thing they've asked you for. But over time, as you're delivering on those things, they build confidence in Tommy Lewis and make it plain. Then they start asking you more and giving you more leeway. So you and I in this industry will sustain itself as it solves problems and meets the needs of the individuals and organizations we serve.
Building trust, Eric. Let me close with this, and then I'll let you close the show. Here's where everyone can use this in your personal lives or your professional lives. Let's look at trust. Say if there are only two ways we trust. I know there's more than two, but we're going to land on two, Eric. One way is that you take your big basket of trust and you simply give it to the other person or the other organization. You just give your trust away, right? Now, you don't give all the small kind of personal pieces, but you take your big basket of trust and you give it away. That's one way. The other way, Eric, is that you take your big basket of trust and you parcel it out. You give away some trust and you make sure that that person or that organization handles it well, that they don't abuse it or misuse it. And so as they are, quote unquote, earning your trust, you're continuing to give from your big basket of trust.
Right.
That's the easy side, Eric. If we either give our big basket or we parcel it out. The tougher side is when a person, an organization, or a system has lost your trust, how do they regain it? So in some cases, some people say they can't. Once you lost my trust, it's a wrap. It's over, right? Or some people say, well, you can regain my trust. I will set the standard and you will never reach it. As you continue to do things to regain my trust, I silently continue to raise the bar. You don't even know that you will never get my trust back. Some people say, okay, you've come back to apologize. There are witnesses to your apology. You've humbled yourself. You may be a bigger man than me or a bigger woman than me or a bigger human being than me. What lesson might I learn? Because I think I may make a mistake and lose someone else's trust. So now, in order for you to get my trust back, I must be trustworthy.
Right.
The system, the process, the culture, or the person must have the basis to trust, the willingness to trust, and the readiness to trust. The question is, when we build trust and confidence in delivering on assignments or requests, are we willing to regain trust once it has been lost?
That's powerful.
And that's where we are right now.
So this is our closing. Maybe some of you in our audience thought that this was just inside baseball today. Tommy and I were just talking about business and DEIB and the attacks on it. I hope you didn't miss all the lessons that are here for you today, whether you work in this field or not. Tim, Top Cat, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate all the brothers at the barbershop for listening in to us today. I'm coming down. I love you and miss you. Catherine, Katie, I appreciate you. Kathy, I appreciate you tuning in and weighing in. Terry Cooley, we love you. John Vanderveer, my neighbor from Skyline Acres, I love you, man. Loved your family. And we are blessed to have you all travel along with us as Tommy and I work to give our very best to each of you. The gift that we have as co-hosts, maybe some co-hosts on some of these podcasts are just professionally connected. Our connection goes way beyond that. And we love each other. And every time we get together and spend time together, it is iron sharpening iron. And so, as you join the show, Tommy and I are also joining the show. You know, everything he says, I'm like a studio audience myself. I'm listening to what he says and benefit from it. And I'm benefiting from the things that you all say as you weigh in. We love you. We're trying to get better as human beings, because for me, it doesn't matter what I do professionally if I'm not living this out with my wife, with my children, with my friends, with the people that work at Integrity, and then the clients and customers that we serve. We've got to constantly, and when we are working on our character and when we are working on loving everybody else, because that's what Tommy and I really do. That's why we can't fail, is that we are literally trying to teach people and encourage people to love each other. You can call it any old fancy name you want to call it. At the end of the day, We're saying, I love you. And I believe that work goes better if you love each other. So thank you. Tommy, until next week, community, hang in there, love somebody, and know that no matter what you hear in the political biosphere around DEI, DEIA, DEIB, those attacks will fail.
They will
Because
fail.
love always wins. Take care.
Take care.